Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Now we'd like to hear from Mr. Byrne on California Water Commission.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair and members, for having me. My name is Joe Byrne. I'm the chair of the California Water Commission, which until the bond passed was a fairly sleepy commission. But obviously, based upon the questions I've heard already, I'm happy to entertain anything that you may have. I thought what I would do is I'd give a little bit of information about what our task is in front of us, which is to implement what all of you or many of you were involved in coming up with, and then give you an idea of where we are and then the timing as well. So specifically, there's $2.7 billion which go to the Water Commission, which, as you know, are continuously appropriated, and they're for public benefits associated with water storage projects that, 1, improve the operation of the state water system, 2, are cost effective, and 3, provide a net improvement in ecosystem and water quality conditions. We have to do a competitive process that ranks potential projects based upon the expected return for public investment as measured by the magnitude of the public benefits provided. So the projects that are eligible are very clearly articulated in the bond. I think they've already been read through today. But there are surface projects associated with CalFed, which are the 4 projects, sites, Los Vaqueros, Shasta, and Temperance Flats. Groundwater storage projects and groundwater contamination prevention or remediation projects that provide water storage benefits. Conjunctive use and reservoir reoperation projects, and local and regional surface storage projects that improve the operation of water systems in the state. So as Assemblymember Gallagher noted, they are all connected to water storage, but public benefits associated with those. There also needs to be a Delta connection. No project may be funded unless it, quote, provides measurable improvements to the Delta ecosystem or to the tributaries of the Delta. And what are public benefits? Public benefits are ecosystem improvements, water quality improvements, flood control benefits, emergency response, and recreational purposes. And it's very important to note that of all the public benefits that we fund, 50% of what we fund needs to go towards ecosystem benefits. There's also a cost share, so we can provide no more than 50% for the total cost of a project. On the timing of things, we cannot allocate any money until after December 15, 2016. In the meantime, we are tasked, pursuant to the Act, to come up with regulations to work closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and with the State Water Resource Control Board and get their prioritization of ecosystem benefits and also water quality benefits, and adopt regulations again by December 15th, 2016 is the deadline. And the regulations ultimately are about how we quantify public benefits and setting up a process for how the money will be spent. It also has to do with management of the benefits as well. It's an important piece. It's not just the quantification, identification of the benefits, but how those benefits are going to be maintained over time. So as far as the timing and the process, the Commission has been in place for over 4 years. We've been anticipating this. We do have draft guidelines that are online. We've spent some time on those. We also have, draft regulations as well as guidelines online. Our process is we intend to meet the deadlines, of course, have a very open and stakeholder-driven process in the next 5 to 6 months and continuing until the regulations are adopted. In order for us to hit the deadline, our goal is to have regulations that the Commission adopts and sends to the Office of Administrative Law by the end of summer or September, which will give us a lengthy amount of time to go through that process with OAL, which is a very formal one where they can kick it back to us, et cetera, and we have to make changes, et cetera. So the thought is that we're going to have as open a process as possible, involve as many stakeholders as possible, and really our goal is to implement what all of you decided last year when you adopted Prop 1, and in our we have no agenda other than to try to implement what is in here and stick to what is in the Act. So with that, I entertain any questions as well. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you very much to our panel for addressing the questions that we really had sought to do, to seek out and to do so concisely. Are there any questions from the panel? Mr. Ridley Thomas.
Yes, Mr. Chair. You may know this. I'm sorry that this is kind of a real basic question. Is there any way we can move up that December 15, 2016 deadline? Seems like a great deal of time. And I know there's an administrative law process. I understand a bit about how that works. Is that prohibited by the bond? Does anyone know that specifically?
We can look into that. Does anyone from the panel have a comment? Yeah.
That date is written into the bond language.
Yeah. Okay.
And can that be amended or or anything like that?
And my understanding is not whout a vote of the people.
Without a vote of the people. Well, clearly I was relying on Mr. Rendon too much. Our chair of the Water Commission, you're from Los Angeles. You've been an environmental attorney and the like with a very prominent firm. What can we do from an oversight perspective or from folks who are in the greater Los Angeles area, as you may know that I represent, to make sure that this bond impacts our constituents, our residents positively? We have a unified water agency that is most of my district in the Department of Water and Power, and of course the Met and a couple of replenishment districts, or one replenishment district. What can we do? What can your commission do and your colleagues here to make the Prop 1 really impact the quality of life? You know that we have storage issues, obviously, notwithstanding what needs to happen in the Central Valley and the San Francisco Bay Delta that affects us, but our local water resources and resiliency, which we hear often from Mayor Garcetti and the like, including seismic activity. That wasn't mentioned. It's not explicitly, I don't think, written into the bond, but it's a great concern in terms of our water capacity in the event of a seismic event.
Yeah, and I'm a resident of the city of Los Angeles, and I think I'm even in the area that you represent.
Keep on voting.
So, of course, the issues in Los Angeles are close to me. Speaking on behalf of the Water Commission, I think, of course, the more that people in the state engage in issues, and I think that's been a common problem for Los Angeles, is having folks engage and be as active as folks in their part of the state. Tends to be a little bit more of a complacency there. There's a number of very significant issues that are presented themselves, the groundwater legislation, a number of other things that I think the BDCP, et cetera, which are very important. As far as what we're doing, the Commission, it does not prohibit projects that could be in Southern California if they meet the criteria of what is outlined. It provides some improvements to the Delta and provides benefits and improves the overall system. So I would encourage folks in Southern California to come to our meetings and participate and see if there's opportunities for funding. And I know there are many opportunities for funding in other aspects of the bond as well.
Will the Water Commission be meeting in the Southern California area, or typically meet here in Sacramento?
Yeah, we are going to do that. And I've made a point to make that a plan as the only representative south of Tehachapi's on the Commission. So
I would add very briefly, Mr. Chairman, that this dialogue is extremely important and folks can access it online. It might be good to replicate this with the Los Angeles delegation somewhere in the Los Angeles area, maybe around downtown if you're willing. I'd like to work with the chair and others who are interested to do so, because what you're talking about is of extreme importance. It impacts so much of the quality of life, and it's something that the state really has a significant role to play, and it affects all the stakeholders, many of whom are represented here. But the constituents of my assembly district in Greater Los Angeles need to see, hear, and understand exactly what is going to occur. And they hear from their statewide groups, let's say advocacy groups, and they may believe or understand something that is frankly contrary to their own interests. So it's very important that we bring the resources that each and every one of you have to bear, and that they understand the regulatory process and appreciate that this is going to take at least, 18, 19 months before we actually see a project and a dollar that hits.
Mr. Chair, if I might address that. As many of us were saying, there are meetings required in relation to the implementation of the bond, and there will be meetings that will be scheduled in the Los Angeles basin. And so what we can do is just do our best to work with the committee, individual members, to let them know when and where they are scheduled in case you wish to add to the publicity on it and reach out to individual constituents. And I did, a week ago Friday, speak to hundreds of local land use officials for planning departments and attorneys in downtown Los Angeles from the entire basin, and ran through the top line issues that were going on, including how we were putting these things together.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary, and thank you, members, for those questions. We've got about 4 members deep for some questions to go. I did want to comment on a couple of things. In the last year, there were a number of hearings on the proposed bond around the state. And this committee would be remiss if we did not go back out, perhaps not to every community that Mr. Rendon brought us to, but two other parts of the state to allow everyone in California to be engaged in the oversight that we are conducting today. And so I think that's something for us to continue to work on. It's not something that just happens in Sacramento, but everywhere. I also want to comment on the December 16 date that is in the bond. That, I believe, we took advantage of a crisis of the drought that passed, something very important for the state of California and our water supply. But we also wanted to ensure that we could be contemplative and thoughtful about how that money is spent and invested, and to be sure, importantly, that it is spent wisely. Now, of course, we are in our 4th year of drought, and people are thinking, we just passed a bond, and how come we're not doing anything about it? And people have an expectation, fair or not, that we respond and react to that ongoing crisis. So you don't need to respond to me immediately if you don't want to, because I know I've got a lot of other members that want to ask a few questions as well, but you can kind of layer in a little bit to what your responses are, whether or not there is some type of reaction or planning that has changed, because we don't know if we're in a 4-year drought or not, or in the Australian model, an 8-year drought, which is something that is very difficult for us to consider at this time. I believe I have Mr. Gray next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Laird and the other members of the panel. Appreciate your leadership in these areas and your commitment to rolling this out in the most efficient and most effective way. Certainly, it's on everybody's mind with the continued drought, what we're going to do in response. I've got a number of questions. First and foremost, for Secretary Laird, there's been a great deal of discussion regarding the health and restoration of the wetlands in my district. And when I reached out to my constituents in reference to this hearing, questions came up as far as the funding, the proper funding allocated for wetland restoration. Are we going to seek this funding from the governor? What's the time frame before we start seeking improvements to wetlands in the Central Valley?
I'm going to let Director Bonham respond.
Very good.
Mr. Gray, I'll underscore my goal with our initial allocation under Prop 1, which is $36.5 million. My goal for our department is to be approving the first set of grant recipients by the end of this calendar year. In the professional field of habitat restoration, particularly for in-river work, there is a limited field season. You tend to see most of the habitat restoration occur end of summer, early fall. So I'm not yet clear in my own mind whether I can move our process fast enough while ensuring transparency and quality to actually have projects breaking ground this calendar year. I am of the view we will be approving that first round, and people will be well positioned at a minimum for field work in 16.
Okay. Thank you for that. Next. You want to come back to me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, panel, for being here. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you, Secretary Laird. What are your thoughts on the need to expedite funding to support development of groundwater sustainability agencies? From what we hear, the formation of these agencies could be challenging, and the statutory time for completion is short. So wouldn't expedited funding for this purpose significantly improve the chance for success? And then I also have a question for Felicia Marcus. Real quick, sorry. I see the State Board is requesting $600,000 of the $800 million available for 2015-16 for groundwater contamination. Why is the groundwater contamination funding not front-loaded? In my district, we're dealing with two very expensive contaminants, the PCE and hexchronium, and this treatment would benefit my district greatly. So those two questions. Thank you.
There is money for the groundwater, but Mark's department is managing it. I'm going to let him speak to that question.
Right, and I completely agree with you. That funding will be vital to get these groundwater sustainability agencies up and functional. So we do have a budget request this year for, I believe it was 20 million of the 100 million to try to get that out. I think we do have a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem in that the agencies have to self-identify themselves in order to be eligible to have the funding awarded to them. So I think we'll have to work through that. I think there's probably some possibilities to provide some capacity to help that happen. But there are some details to work through, but I think we share the same objectives.
Right. I agreed with that, and I think both agencies are looking to see where we have money that could be that we already have that we can use to help facilitate the extensive facilitation that governance piece of it is going to take. So we're trying to find ways to help outside the bond dollars as well, because it's in all of our interests for it to be successful at the local level. On the theory behind the groundwater partitioning is partially what I said, but to give it more detail, we have been funded over time. We've become fee generated. I think this happened over the last decade or so, and so we have not had the staffing to be able to go out ahead of the curve. We've only been able to go where we can find a potentially responsible party and be able to fund our work that way. It's been a part that's been unfortunately starved, and that this program will help us remediate where we can go just get stuff cleaned up and then have people figure out how to go after PRPs if you could find it, but more importantly, be able to prevent the spread of contamination or clean things up in the absence of being able to find a potentially responsible party. It's one of the anomalies of the situation that somehow our hands are more tied behind our back than they were 10 to 15 years ago. The same is true at DTSC, the same is true at the U.S. EPA, where there used to be a lot of orphan site money, and now all of a sudden with Proposition 1 we will have some money. But there are a lot of people with their eyes on that money. So the first piece is to be able to staff up to do the stuff to tee it up that we haven't had before, or we haven't had over the last decade or so, to be able to actually administer a program of this nature. And then there really is a need to have pretty extensive conversations, both in terms of, as you see in it, cleaning up nitrate contamination in the appropriate cases, but also figuring out what's the best way to leverage cleanup in the urban context, which is more what you're talking about. And so it just seems that it's going to take a while to be able to staff up and really be thoughtful about how to use those dollars and implement it, which is why we phased it. We've accelerated what's in the other buckets because we're comfortable doing it. We've been doing it a long time. It's a piece, I think, of why the drinking water program was moved to us, and we're going to be able to find synergies that help get those dollars out the door quickly. I mean, this year we'll be able to do quite a bit. But on groundwater, I think our judgment was that it's better to be thoughtful about it and then ramp up the funding where everybody is clear on what the rules are going to be, because it really calls for leveraging these dollars to get things done that couldn't get done otherwise, which is not just cleaning it up for cleaning it up's sake, but cleaning it up particularly in the urban context to be able to use it as a groundwater storage resource that can be used and reused, and you can put stormwater and recycled water into, which is a key focus of the multi-benefit approach in the Water Action Plan.
And it seems like a small amount, 600,000 out of 800 million for contamination.
Right, but eventually that ramps up. So
All
there'll
right.
be a lot of money going out the doors, but we want to do it thoughtfully.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez.
First, one comment and then just a question regarding the groundwater as well. Specifically on the oversight of the water bond, I think you hear a passion for it just because for a variety of reasons, right? One of them is putting together a water bond is not an easy thing to do. No, it's not for the faint of heart. And, you know, through conversations that I had with other people who negotiated the previous bond, they often said, watch the language very carefully as it's as the bill is making their way through the process, because the changes can be very subtle, but the impacts magnified. And it's something that we were watching and every step of the way through the water bond. And this brought together very diverse regions, right? You've never seen anything like that before. But it was based on the understanding that each region would benefit from this bond. So although I don't live in the valley, I'm concerned about the valley and its storage, right? I don't live in the Delta, but I'm concerned about the Delta in LA because, well, we get a lot of water from the Delta. So we want to make sure that this oversight is a positive and constructive relationship so that we can make sure that what I put my name on and every single member voted on is something that that it lives up to what our expectations, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. So it's not to pound our chest, but it's to make sure that we don't undermine the confidence that the voters have in us for passing this water bond, and that's where I'm looking forward to this oversight. So that's my comment on the oversight. On the question on the contamination, the groundwater contamination, this has never been done. What kind of criteria are you going to be looking at? Because one of the things that when we're looking at the groundwater contamination section, is that you can build like the plant to clean up the water, but then the operations and maintenance will probably be larger than the project itself. Are you going to be? How would you be assessing potential projects when it comes to an ability to build, but then actually maintain and operate that cleanup?
Sorry for turning my back to you. I apologize. And that's part of the challenge in thinking it through. I mean, clearly there are going to be synergies between the safe drinking water funds and the contamination funds, the stormwater capture funds, and the contamination funds. And I think part of our challenge in figuring out how to do these guidelines, where we're very much open to suggestion, is to make sure that we can help the small communities who are the ones who are drinking really bad water in many places, but that it'll have some continuation. And so part of our thinking has been to take the language in the bond that encourages prioritizing projects that help disadvantaged communities. They're not always done by disadvantaged communities. So, for example, as I mentioned, there could be a regional project that ends up getting more priority because it's actually taking care of an issue for a disadvantaged community. So that's how we're thinking about figuring out how to leverage it over time. And that's a piece of why we feel we need to be very thoughtful with the guidelines. Because the goal, when all is said and done, is to be able to use these dollars, which are tremendous because we haven't had them for years and we've never had them in this quantity, but to do something that's going to have real durable staying power and leverage, the greatest good, but with an eye towards helping the most disadvantaged among us, which is a repeated theme across the bond, which again I've never seen in a bond like this. So it's that's why my heart is happy.
Thank you, Mr. Rendon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this important oversight hearing. It's good to see that the sort of spirit of openness and accountability, transparency with which the bond was developed continues through the work of this committee. And when Mr. Laird talks about the public hearings and the openness with which his department is operating, it sounds as though it's being mimicked further. Ms. Marcus talked about the tremendous need that we have in this state, and that's something that I thought deserved to be, we should dwell on it a little bit. And Mr. Gomez was quite articulate in talking about the need for this bond to be successful. If you think of just one aspect, safe drinking water, this bond allocates less than 5% of what we need in terms of infrastructure. So the success of this bond from the standpoint of this body and from the standpoint of your agencies, but for the standpoint of our water future and making sure that we can go back to voters in the future and making sure that we can talk to stakeholders about asking for additional resources is exceptionally important. You touched a little bit, Ms. Marcus, on disadvantaged communities, and there were two considerations that were woven through, and this is for all of the directors, there were two considerations that were sort of woven through all aspects of the bond. One was providing technical assistance for disadvantaged communities to make sure that they had the ability to be able to compete with other communities for these funds. And the other consideration was a preference for emerging technologies to make sure that we're sort of on the cusp of on the cutting edge of water technology. I wanted to see what what steps the directors are taking to make sure that technical assistance for disadvantaged communities and emerging technologies are considered in bond allocations.
Great. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and start and then hand it off to my colleagues. Technical assistance is going to be a really important part of this, and it does give us the resources to be able to do that. We've had a pretty good track record on our wastewater side, and so we'll be able to expand that even more to the drinking water side, which the Department of Public Health did as well when they had the program. So it's going to be a critical part of it. By my caution, I wasn't trying to imply that this is a drop in the bucket. This is enormous in terms of what it's going to do for people. We're going to be able to do things that we've been frustrated we haven't been able to do. I just wanted to make the point that the need, as you say, is far greater, and we're going to need to do even more. But that doesn't detract from how much we are going to be able to do. When it comes to technology, we're already trying to do, I'll just give a couple of examples in reviewing projects that come in. We've done some innovative work, both with the Community Water Center with help from the California Endowment. Recently, they just rolled out a community water system, water filtration system that folks can go to in a disadvantaged community. We're testing out point of entry devices in homes, which might be a better solution for some remote, far-flung communities than trying to replicate the system we have in a place like the city of Los Angeles everywhere. That's incredibly expensive. There's a flip side in that people, engineers, technical people, public health folks are nervous about anything like with gray water that they can't actually control that requires changing a filter or doing something, but we just used our cleanup and abatement dollars to do a pilot project with UCLA to test out some of those devices because the communities and technical people and academics think that might be a way to stretch our dollars more economically and get further faster in a situation that's appropriate. I mean, part of this is going to be, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all because every community's challenges are different. As I said, there are going to be places whereby giving people incentives and removing barriers, which will require more work from all of you, we may get larger agencies to either consolidate or, short of consolidation, which a lot of people don't like, service remote communities with the new remote management devices that are in use all along. You don't need to have an operator physically at a plant once it's built, but you need someone monitoring the technology and able to get there in a moment's notice if need be. And so we're looking at a lot of those distributed treatment opportunities, which may be helpful at the same time that we're trying to figure out how we can leverage some of the folks who actually have the capacity to help their neighbors, which happily there are a number of communities that actually want to do. So it'll be a mix of those.
In response to our activities regarding disadvantaged communities, I think Mr. Endon has it right. I think there's a general observation that while past bonds provided a preference for funding projects for disadvantaged communities, a lack of capacity in those communities to step up, propose projects, and get engaged in a way that made them competitive for those funds, paired with the desire to get the money out the door quickly, has resulted in a lack of funding on a proportionally needed basis for those disadvantaged communities. So that is the exciting part of this bond. It gives us new tools for dealing with that. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the department has requested about $30 million this year specifically for disadvantaged communities through our integrated regional water management program. And that funding will be awarded both for capacity building and for the projects that comes from the engagement of those parties. So much to be done, and I'd say that I think we have high risk of seeing the same type of outcomes if we don't use every tool we have to develop capacity. So something for us all to work on.
And Mr. Chairman, let me very briefly comment on both Mr. Gomez's and Mr. Rendon's comments because we appreciate them and we share the sentiment about the transparency and openness because the bond is just part of the investment that's going to have to be made over the next decades by local agencies, the state again, many other agencies. And if we don't lead in a way that's clear and transparent, leverages other funds, and shows that this was wisely spent, it doesn't help us with that additional investment that has to be made. So we're really committed to that because we see how it fits in the entire scheme of things.
Mr. Rendon, two comments for our department related to your question. First, as to technical assistance, I'm not completed in my own thinking how to do right by that commitment, but I believe in it for this reason. Too often, these ecosystem restoration projects are stovepiped as only related to a habitat value, when in fact we find a lot of our most degraded habitat is in close proximity to disadvantaged communities. And in our long-run interest, building a broader community that sees the value of habitat restoration as it relates to their own life is an important objective for our department. So we're thinking about that component. As to emerging technologies, my expectation is we will actually have a scoring feature in our competitive grant making, which will help bring forward those that are embracing emerging technology. They're out there. For example, replacing an old culvert with a modern screen technology is an example. There's a lot of technology development in the management of legacy roads on the North Coast to manage sediment load. And there's very much emerging technology around moving off of, in some cases, gauging in a rivershed towards pressure transducers at critical riffle or salmon spawning beds to measure water volume, which may be related to Mr. Donnelly's work on how you ensure an enhanced stream flow program actually secures an enhanced amount of stream flow.